Singapore will double down on regional economic integration and seek out new growth opportunities like the digital and green economies. This comes after a meeting among ASEAN economic ministers where they pledged to not impose any retaliatory measures in response to the U.S. tariffs. Still, one analyst says this is a short-term reprieve and not a permanent de-escalation. Nadira Zaidi has more.
Frank and constructive dialogue. That's what ASEAN member nations are seeking with the US as economic ministers from 10 member states met virtually on Thursday morning. At the end of the meeting, members reaffirmed their readiness to work together with the US to address trade-related concerns, maintain ties while safeguarding ASEAN's economic interests. Some areas of deeper cooperation include improving supply chain connections and using digital tech and innovation. The bloc is also considering an ASEAN-US economic cooperation framework to drive growth in high-value sectors like green technology, garment and footwear. While US President Trump has put a 90-day pause on tariffs, market watchers say trust has depleted.
Imagine tomorrow everything goes back to normal, 0%, or it's back to January the 1st. The trust will be gone, or at least a large degree of the trust. And many would already be looking at alternate trading structures and different markets altogether.
Both consumer, both businesses will be very cautious in terms of spending or investing in the new projects. So in the near term, maybe it creates some downward pressures on the growth outlook.
In a statement, Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim-yong affirmed Singapore's commitment to stand united with ASEAN member states. Even then, non-tariff barriers like customs surcharges and quality requirements remain hurdles in improving intra-ASEAN trade.
It would take some time before each country can think of how to open the door for more competition, but at the same time protect the local industry.
Small businesses add that they hope more support can be given.
If the economy slows down substantially or there's a sign of that, maybe bringing forward certain government spending so that would allow companies to stay afloat and the economy to continue humming.
A regional task force will be set up to discuss the potential economic impact of the tariffs and to safeguard ASEAN's trade and investment interests.
Individual ASEAN members are shaping up their own responses as well. Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra says the temporary pause gives the government time to refine its plans before it negotiates with Washington.
เราคงทำทุกรูปแบบนะคะแบบระหว่างที่ทุกอย่างที่จะช่วยทั้งประเทศเราแล้วก็อาเซียนด้วยนะคะอะไรที่จับกับอาเซียนแล้วมีพลังกว่าก็ดีค่ะแต่ว่าเราต้องทำของประเทศเราด้วยคิดว่าทุกประเทศทำแบบนี้เช่นกัน
Indonesia also seeing the pause as an opportunity to mitigate tariff impacts, which would otherwise slash GDP growth by 0.3 to 0.5%. Its finance minister says the country will use the time to establish a framework for cooperation. Vietnam will begin negotiations for a reciprocal trade agreement with the U.S. Both countries will consider removing as many non-tariff barriers as possible. Hanoi faces a 46% tariff, one of the highest, and has been scrambling to appease Washington. Now, China has urged the U.S. to meet it halfway amid the spiraling trade war, Beijing repeating that it will fight to the end if a deal cannot be reached.
美方仍在对中国滥施关税，对这种霸道霸凌的行径，中方坚决反对，绝不接受。施压、威胁和讹诈不是同中方打交道的正确方式。美方如果真的想谈，就应该拿出平等、尊重、互惠的态度。如果美方置两国和国际社会的利益于不顾，执意打关税战、贸易战，中方必将奉陪到底。
Investors cheered President Trump's pause on tariffs, with the Hang Seng ending the session 2% higher. The Nikkei and the TAIEX saw far larger gains of more than 9%. Singapore's benchmark Straits Times Index also rebounding, jumping 5.4% to close at just under 3,578 points. Now, to tell us more on how trade, tariffs and regional supply chains are affected is Priyanka Kishore, principal economist at Asia Decoded. Ms. Kishore, the U.S. tariffs have currently been suspended for most countries. From the supply chain perspective, how much of a shock is this start-stop situation?
I would say that the biggest challenge that is facing the business community at this part of the world is the uncertainty that is being created by this start, stop, flip-flop of tariffs. If you are a business, you don't know how much your import costs will change, even maybe by tomorrow, and you also don't know if your orders still stand. And this is leading to problems that are rippling through the supply chains, paralyzing them. And this remains a challenge. Tariff pause is only a temporary reprieve, I would say.
Paint us a clearer picture of this uncertainty that you mentioned. What do these supply chain shocks look like? Are we looking at ships stranded in the middle of the ocean waiting for further instructions, perhaps?
That is a very good example. So we could possibly see a pickup in container shipments during this pause as companies lead to front load their goods to the US. But beyond that, they cannot plan because they don't know what is the scope, what is the scale, and what is the duration of this tariff. And then that's going to hurt this industry. It's already being plagued by cancellation of orders and ditching of shipments. So that will remain a concern.
And how do you expect trade flows to shift amid these uncertain times?
Well, to begin with, we will see shrinking trade flows. The US is trying to upend a global system of 90 years, and that will have consequences. The US-China trade flows will be the worst impacted. China has already reduced its export to the US since 2018 as a result of the initial tariffs that have come in. That share has gone down from 19% to 15%. What will also happen is that as they export less to the US, they will export more to the rest of the world, particularly Asia and ASEAN, where share of Chinese imports has gone up from less than 10% in 2011 to 16% as of last year. So we are going to see these changes in trade flows coming through.
Are there options that countries can turn to?
In the sense of diversification of markets, yes, that is something definitely countries would be looking at. They would be looking at regional cooperations, enhancing intra-regional trade. But let's be very frank, it's pretty difficult to compete with cheap Chinese products in third markets at this point of time, which is why companies are not letting go of options of negotiating with the US as well. They do not want to lose their first or second largest exporting destination from perspective of Asia.
And meanwhile, ASEAN economic ministers have decided not to retaliate against the US tariffs. What do you make of this decision? Is it the best move on ASEAN's part?
Definitely. I think it's the wise thing to do. While there could be a temptation to retaliate, we cannot forget that trade accounts for more than 100% of GDP for many countries in this part of the world is very important. And if you retaliate in such a scenario, you're only harming trade opportunities, export opportunities, which are detrimental to your own domestic economy. So by holding back and trying to have a dialogue with the US, I think they're safeguarding their interests, their economic interests, and this is the right thing to do.
And ASEAN is saying that it wants frank and constructive talks with the US. What's your read of the bargaining power the bloc has as a whole versus individual countries engaging the US administration?
This is an interesting move, and we'll have to see how it pans out because negotiations with the US, whether as a group or whether individually, are very challenging at this point of time because the US is not just looking for reduction in tariffs or trade barriers. It is looking at non-trade related concessions potentially involving currencies and holdings of US debt. And we don't really know how that comes across as a group to be negotiated. In addition, particularly from ASEAN's perspective, there could be demands related to altering or limiting their economic ties with China. And that will be quite a difficult demand for this region to accept.
So we know that ASEAN has pledged to reduce non-tariff barriers such as customs surcharges and monopolistic measures. But how long will that process take?
I think the blueprint for ASEAN to come together has been in place for many years, and it's a good step in the right direction that they're committing to look at it again at more closely. What it really requires is political commitment and the will to push it forward. And if that actually comes together at this hour, then it will have a positive impact. It can come through quite easily and quickly because they have been working towards it in practice. There is a framework in place and there are procedures in place. This will also help, at least from a production perspective, vertical integration of supply chains within ASEAN, which is another aspect of this trade and tariff war, building an alternative supply chain from China, which gives it more bargaining power with the US. So I think the imperatives are high, and this could come through much quicker than would normally happen.
Thank you for your perspectives, Ms. Kishore. Priyanka Kishore there, Principal Economist at Asia Decoded.